morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Mortensen. I serve as President CEO at Midland Area Community Foundation, and more importantly, I serve on the Long-Term Recovery Group and the Steering Committee. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the first in a series of flood recovery update and connection meetings that we'll be hosting the first and third Thursdays of each month. We'll be pulling in members of our long-term recovery group, those serving on our subcommittees as a part of this. So we're very excited to welcome you. And I want to thank you, first of all, for your interest and your support through this process. And I've got to say, as we've worked through the flood, it's reaffirmed our care for neighbors and our sense of community in Midland County that we share. So while it's been a terrible time for us as a community, it's also been reaffirming to show our care for one another. So before we get started today, I wanted to turn it over to Emily Schaefer, the Director of Development here, to go over logistics with us, and then we'll get started today.
Thank you, Sharon, and welcome all. It's so good to see so many names and see some faces too. So happy to have everybody here. So just as an FYI, we are recording, but you guys all should have gotten a little prompt when you registered that just an FYI that we are recording. And the reason that we're doing that is so that we can broadcast that and put it on different social media stations to come. So tune into the Community Foundation website and social media, Facebook specifically, for updates and where that recording will be. And then other information is that I'm going to keep everybody muted. If you do have a question, you can physically raise your hand, or there is a wave hand button at the bottom. There's a menu there that you can select to wave your hand, or you can send me a message specifically, and then I will get it to the two presenters that we have for the meeting today. And then at the end, we do have a question that we'd like to pose to all of you. So if you would like to answer it, we'd ask that you just send me a note or raise your hand, and I will unmute you as well. I think that's about it. So Sharon, back to you.
Okay, thank you. And again, I just want to say welcome. I know we've had a couple more pop on the call since we started here. And again, thanks for your interest, for your support, for the way that you've come together to help support our community during this incredibly challenging time. So I wanted to share a few slides with you, just taking us back a little bit. But this is, as I mentioned, the first in a series, and it's to really showcase the work of the long-term recovery group, our steering committee, all of our committees that are part of that, and to make sure that you in the community have an update on what's happening. Because I know there are a lot of questions out there about where are things, how are we progressing. So we're not going to be able to answer all of those questions today, but we're going to do an overview of the long-term recovery process, and we're going to talk about case management, and specifically our disaster case management. And we have Nancy Money here that will be sharing that shortly. But to start with, I wanted to share some slides, and these take us back in time a bit. So we're going back to May here, and these slides are thank you to Bridget Granston, Midland County's administrator controller, who has been an absolute rock star during this whole process of the flood. And so she shared these images and a little bit of what happened here. So I think as most of you are aware, on Saturday, May 16th, we first had the National Weather Service issuing a flood watch for Midland County. And then as things began to progress and we realized that we were facing some serious flooding, the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, was activated. And a huge call out and thanks to all those that are a part of that group. The work that they did was just phenomenal. On May the 19th, the Edenville Dam failed, followed by the Sanford Dam failing. And at that point, we had a mass evacuation, and individuals had to leave their homes, and the river did crest, the Tittabawassee River crested at 35.05 feet on May the 20th. So this is a little bit, and so these show you a few images of what happened. And of course, this is one that shows, yeah, county roads destroyed by floodwaters. On the next one, you'll see a picture of the Sanford Dam during the early stages of the failure. The next one here will show you what remains of the earthen berm that was part of the Sanford Dam. And then on the next one here, and this really, I think, speaks to the incredible devastation when you see the rail trail in downtown Sanford the day after the flood. And it kind of takes your breath away a little bit, realizing that. And one of the things that we've got to just kudos to all those with the EOC, our law enforcement, our firefighters, our emergency personnel, there was no loss of life. And that is nothing short of phenomenal. Speaking to our community working together in an incredible way. So in what's happened since this time, and I wanted to share with you a little bit of the long-term recovery group. This is a beautiful graphic actually Holly put together for us, Holly Miller at United Way. And it helps us look at what we're doing through the long-term recovery group. After I show this, we're gonna look at the actual process and then step back to this. But the long-term recovery group is working together. So it's a cross-sector group of individuals from a variety of organizations and agencies serving our community, working together to help as we recover from this flood. It's led by a steering committee, Holly Miller chairing that, John Searles from Midland County Educational Service Agency, Jennifer Boyer, our Midland County Emergency Manager, Nancy Money, who I'll introduce shortly, but who oversees, she's a coordinator for Disaster Recovery Ministries and oversees a disaster case manager serving this area, as well as our construction manager and me. So that's our recovery group steering committee. We meet as a long-term recovery group on a weekly basis. We have 6 subcommittees that are a part of this as we work together. And the 6 subcommittees, we have financial support, volunteer coordination, housing support, rebuilding construction, public relations outreach, and case management assessment. And over the coming weeks and series of these, you're going to hear from each of these committees and about the great work that they're doing and the things in which they're engaged. So it's all of us working together. And this is a disaster unlike any that our community has faced in our lifetimes. So it's at times, it seems slower than people would like it to be because we'd like things to be the way they were before the flood, but we have to work through this process. At times it can be messy work as we figure it out, but we're all in this together with a heart to serve our community. On the next slide, it shows really the process of this. So this takes us through, so really this starts May 19th, and that's emergency. So that was medical and basic needs like food, water, shelter, personal care, cleaning kits. This was evacuation, people going to shelters if needed, people getting the things that they needed just to help during that emergency time. And then we moved into relief, and really kudos to United Way of Midland County and their incredible relief efforts with the centers that they set up to distribute items that individuals needed, with the volunteer work that they did. But then the second phase is this relief where we do data collection. There were volunteers out, again, coordinated through United Way's effort, collecting data, working on damage reports, volunteer information so we could get our FEMA designation, damage assessments, muck outs, initial demo, drying out. I know we all drove by streets, or maybe our streets were some of them. Mine was one that was filled with debris to be picked up by our services in the city. So that was kind of the next step in relief. And then we've moved to this long-term recovery phase, which is really a collaborative and systematic way for us to work together to make sure that individuals are helped through this recovery process. One of the things that I think is really important to know is that when we talk about long-term recovery, we're talking about making people's homes livable, not necessarily restoring to the way they were before. And I know that's a tough part of this whole process, is understanding that with the resources that we have, we want people to be in their homes, knowing they might not look quite the way they did before, depending on what's available. An important part of this, and I think I saw one of our FEMA folks on the call today, and that is that FEMA is here in our community, and we need to use those FEMA dollars first, because they have a lot more money than what we have here in the community to help with recovery. And these were numbers as of Tuesday. So I think I saw you on the line, Sarah. So if anything's wrong here, you can correct me on this. But in the individuals and household program, as of Tuesday, there was a cumulative of over $18 million distributed in our community. And then in the housing assistance area, there was a cumulative of $17,758,906.71 distributed. So the resources that FEMA has brought to our community are significant. And those are the resources we want people to access first. And you'll hear more about this, I think, as Nancy talks about case management too, and how we approach that, because these are incredible resources beyond what we're beginning to be able to offer in our community. Then where we come in is to fill in next. So what is needed to help with those unmet needs? And that's really what our long-term disaster recovery group is looking at, are the unmet needs that have to be addressed to help individuals. One thing I should mention is the work of the long-term disaster recovery group is around individuals. So it's individual focused, not business, not municipal focused, it's individual focused. So just an important piece to know as we begin to, engage in this work. So that is a bit of an overview of the flood recovery work. And the next slide here, again, brings you back to that long-term recovery group and the work that we're doing in each of these different areas. And as you can see, there's robust work going on, utilizing, and this is you're just seeing the names of the chairs, but we have the faith community involved, our houses of worship. We have various organizations involved. We have corporations involved in this work. So and these committees are staffed with many more people that are helping. And in addition to that, I should mention that not only are we doing this work, but there are volunteers that are being coordinated and are working every day on various aspects of this. So that's important to note, because I know often people say, what can I do? How can I help with this? And of course, the initial answer was, when we were first in the relief stage, was help your neighbor. Who is your neighbor? Who are your neighbors? And help them. And then I know we're looking to see, how can we help our community? How can we serve our community? So that's our next stage that we're moving into in this work. I did want to just point out too that there are many people that have given in-kind donations. And in fact, United Way has a whole storage area of in-kind donations that they're working with agency partners and partners in the community to help with distribution. So I know people have also given in that way. So we encourage you, if you're looking for ways to give, to look to volunteer. You can volunteer through United Way. I know churches have some things set up there, and that's, again, coordinated in with what we're doing. That's another way that you can volunteer. That you can also, of course, give financially to this work. And I think your interest in being here, that is so appreciated, just your support and the way that you're showing support through joining this conversation today. So with that overview, I will tell you too that there are many wonderful resources available, and we'll mention this again at the end, but reliefmidland.org has a frequently asked question document that talks about the long-term recovery group. It is extensive. It talks about the work that FEMA is doing right now. It's a very extensive document. I encourage you to take a look at that as you're looking for specific resources with this. So one of the important parts of what we're doing here is, how do we reach flood victims? How do we find out what their needs are, and how do we assist them? And certainly some of that work has been done through initial visiting with people, phone calling. But then the next step in this is a systematic way where we have disaster case managers, a construction manager that are helping flood victims. And the person that is overseeing that work here in our community is Nancy Money. And as I mentioned, she's a coordinator for disaster recovery ministry, sorry. And so I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to talk about the work of these disaster case managers and our construction manager and the way that whole process works here. So Nancy, thank you.
Great, thanks Sharon. So thank you to all of you for being here today. A lot of you I know, some of you I do not. A lot of them are familiar faces that I see multiple times a day, I feel like, on meetings. So thank you for being a part of this today. And so I'll talk a little bit on a high level about what disaster case management is, and then kind of tell you specifically more how it kind of all comes together with community partners, et cetera, in this Great Lakes Bay flooding, or the Great Lakes Bay region flood. So just to let you kind of get an understanding, disaster case management is different than regular case management, because one of the things that happens is that when there is any kind of disaster, you start hearing, well, there was a case manager from Red Cross, there was a case manager from Catholic Charities, there was a case manager from wherever. And there is case management that happens initially in these kind of disasters, but what we're really focused on right now in the long-term recovery group and with the disaster case managers that have been hired is the long-term piece of it. Really helping people recover versus that short-term need of finding somewhere to stay that's safe, et cetera. So really the critical function in the context of long-term recovery is for the disaster case manager to be that conduit between the community, the resources that are available, and the needs that they have. And they're really guided by the value that they don't want to do anything that diminishes hope or stops the survivor's progress. They're guided by values that include, we don't tie to any like religious or political viewpoint. We focus on the most vulnerable. So we know that every community has people that experience disasters that may have the capacity to recover themselves, and that's our hope. So our goal really is to work with those that are most vulnerable and don't have other resources available to help them. We honor cultural differences. We make sure that we are showing that all people have dignity and worth. We try to be collaborative and work with local partners. We want to be good stewards of donated resources. And the big thing too is that we incorporate best practices and standards. So when we talk about disaster case management, this isn't something that I thought of in May when this happened. This is something that is a tried and true practice, and UMCOR specifically, which stands for United Methodist Committee on Relief, is really looking at what works. How do we move people along this spectrum of response into recovery and what that looks like, knowing that it's not going to be exactly what it looked like prior to whatever they experienced. So we really look at what works, what doesn't work, what works in our community. So while we say that we use best practices and standards, we also know that we have to be flexible to make it work in our own communities. What happens in a community like in Texas or North Carolina or Florida with big hurricanes is very different than what we experience in mid-Michigan. So there are things that we can glean from that and we can put in place and in practice, but then we also know, like I said, we need to be flexible and make sure that it works for what we're experiencing here with our own folks. Within that best practice piece, I want you to know that we collaborate with the National VOADs, which is Volunteer Organizations Assisting in Disaster, and we have points of consensus that we all agree upon. And VOADs are organizations like Team Rubicon, like the Baptists, like Samaritan's Purse, that do this disaster work. And in these points of consensus, again, going back to what I said, these aren't things that Nancy Money decided would work well after this Great Lakes Bay region incident. What it means is we all, as VOADs, agree among how does this look and what works best in communities. And really the intent of that is to promote standardized delivery so that we're not all working in silos and trying to do our own thing while other organizations are out there trying to help as well. So there's some basic principles with disaster case management that is slightly different than what we think of case management. And sometimes case management people think of, well, it's social, and emotional counseling, or it's providing them a place to live, or it's allowing them to be able to pay their electric bill. Disaster case management is all of those things and more. So the first thing is in disaster case management is that we have to understand that the community needs to own the disaster. And what that means is the community needs to understand that this is their disaster. There's not going to be Mighty Mouse coming in to save the day. It's going to be, we need to figure out how to make this work in our own community, and what can we do as a community to recover. And within that, that also means from a disaster case management standpoint with individuals, the individuals have to own their recovery, their own recovery. So not that we're going to do this for them, but we're going to do it with them. So we're going to walk alongside folks who have experienced a disaster and help them figure out what does that recovery look like for them, because we can't decide that for them, nor should we ever decide that for them. We want to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, that we're maximizing resources. And the other thing is that we're providing equitable access and distribution of resources. So we want to make sure that, again, we're prioritizing the most vulnerable, but that everybody has access to case management. Now, does that mean everybody's going to have access to philanthropic dollars for reconstruction or rebuild? No, but it means that maybe they have spiritual and emotional care needs that can be met through case management. So we want to make sure that we're providing that access to everybody. And another founding principle is compassion, and meaning that we want to work with those who are at greater risk from the effects of a disaster. Some people do have the capacity, both financially and emotionally, to handle it themselves, but some people don't. Some people who might have the capacity to handle it financially don't have the capacity to handle it emotionally. And so we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of those with greater risk, whatever that risk may be. We also want to make sure that we're working with folks who can't access or use standard resources offered after a disaster. So if for some reason, meaning that they weren't able to work with Red Cross to find housing, or that they weren't able to qualify for FEMA, et cetera. But we also, the biggest thing is that we want to make sure that they have the ability to recover on their own. That is really our goal, is to get them to be able to recover on their own while we walk alongside them. And as Sharon mentioned earlier, there's phases in disaster. But what I want you to understand is in long-term recovery, it's kind of like the stages of grief. It doesn't always go along this beautiful, nice little spectrum. Somebody can be in the recovery phase, but go back to really, oh wait, now they are in the relief phase, because we need to mitigate, we need to do some volunteer support, maybe they didn't get a muck out and clean up. So while we want to say that our entire community has moved into recovery, that's not entirely accurate, because we do have folks who are still in the relief phase, and it will go back and forth for a while. And our case managers will find people months down the road from now who haven't had a muck out, who've been living in mold, who haven't been able to get the resources that they need. So it's kind of a nebulous thing to it, but the other pieces to it that are on both ends of this rescue, relief, and recovery our readiness and review. So our community looking at the end of this, what can we do differently if, God forbid, this happens again? But we didn't think in 2017, when we wrote the plan after 2017 for our community, that we thought we'd all be dead and gone before we'd ever have to use that plan, but here we are. And so what are we going to learn from 2020 and 2021 that will help us then in the future? So one of the things to understand is that each of these phases has a timeline, and kind of the rule that we use is, if you can take the example of let's just say rescue takes 10 days, then we know that relief is probably going to take about 30, and recovery is going to take about 300. And so kind of looking at that, the way that exponentially increases for the amount of time that each of these phases take. So, well, I think sometimes that people want to think, well, we're in recovery and we're going to have everybody back to what they think is recovered by, let's see, what is it, August? Well, by October, we should be good. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And the term that you hear thrown around a lot in our long-term recovery group is, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Because it's a sprint at the beginning, and everybody's moving quickly, and everybody's trying to get resources out, and everybody's trying to get folks safe and out of harm's way. But the recovery piece is a very methodical, very well thought out, very process oriented way of doing things. Because what happens if you don't do that is we can end up doing more harm than good. We can utilize resources not in the best, most impactful way. And so I know it can be frustrating for community people, both funders and those that have been affected, to feel like, well, we're not doing enough fast enough. I promise you, from a disaster case management standpoint, we are way ahead of where we were in 2017. We are so far ahead in doing things and resources being deployed than we were in 2017. And that's a testament to your community and your long-term recovery group and the work that they're doing. But it is a process, and I just want you to understand that. So in early casework, what our caseworkers are doing is really providing timely information for referrals and resources, and trying to help some survivors manage without any additional help. And then some of the people that aren't able to recover without additional help will become clients of our disaster case managers, to work with them on a long-term basis to see what that can need. And really, so you understand, though, disaster case management is a time-limited process where they're working with a skilled helper and they're partnering with a disaster-affected family on that plan to achieve their goals. So every family has a recovery plan, and so that they can be working toward what those goals are. And again, that's client-led, but they are working alongside them, but it isn't going to go on forever. At some point, the client will say, I'm at a point where I'm good. It may not be what I was prior. It may not be what I initially envisioned, but this is where I am and I'm okay now. And so those disaster case managers really are working as the primary point of contact and to maintain a continuity of care. So if they did start out with Red Cross and they were in a shelter, or in this case, many of them were in hotels, what does that next step look like? They want to make sure that they're providing confidential treatment of client information, and coordinating services and resources that are in the community. So a lot of the things that our disaster case managers are really looking at are working with folks with their FEMA. So they're looking at their application. Do they need help with it? Do they need help with their SBA application? If they were denied, they can get help with their appeal process. They're looking at rebuilds and working with our construction manager to get assessments done, because a lot of times what will happen is a case manager will get a call saying, well, I just need subflooring in my kitchen, and then I'll be able to move back in my house, because that's what they think the need is. And then we assess it and we're like, oh, but you have structural damage. And so what the homeowner is feeling like might the need be is sometimes not the need. And we also help with spiritual and emotional care, and recovery planning, because I think a lot of times the other thing is it's looked at as disaster case managers. Their job is to help people rebuild. But what I want you to understand is it's much, much more than that. It is looking at, are they okay mentally? Are they okay spiritually? Are they okay socially? What things can we help put in place so that they are recovered from that aspect, and not just we're helping coordinate construction for them, because that is not just their role. And navigating that whole process with them. So in terms of like the actual process for case management, in very clinical terms, what we do is we do outreach and screening. So we're looking at folks to see, do you even need help? Are you recovered? Because we have a list of 4,000 people, and I guarantee what they said on June 1st that they need help with is not what they need help with now. Our hope is that they've recovered themselves, but they may not have, or they might have said, I need this, this, and this. And that's not anymore what they need. So we're going through and screening those folks to see what is their current needs. If we feel like it's something that there needs to be more conversation about, we'll do an intake and an assessment, which is a much more in-depth process of looking at all those pieces, including, have you applied for FEMA? What monies have you gotten? What have you spent it on? What are the risk factors? Do you have vulnerable people in your home? Do you have kids? Do you have folks with disabilities? Are you a senior? All those kind of things, so that we can then prioritize. And from that assessment and planning stage goes into action and advocacy. And what we mean by that is We are looking to meet their needs and whatever that looks like. So if it's spiritual and emotional care, we're looking to get them hooked up with folks that can help provide that. If it's they do need help getting back in their home with rebuild or something like that, we're looking at working again with the construction manager and the funding table to be able to deploy those resources to be able to help them do that. And then we, the intent is that we're able to close the case and move on to evaluation. The last thing that I really want to talk about specifically is that going back to something that I mentioned earlier about that this is a process. And right now, I know that a lot of funders are feeling that we need to get resources out there or feeling like we need to get volunteers in to help. One thing that I want you to understand is we do not want to duplicate resources. So while it may feel like we're not getting funding out there, because people are still in the process of applying to FEMA and SBA, our case management does not want to deploy philanthropic dollars that the community has donated when folks may be able to benefit from FEMA and the SBA loans. So the reason that this may seem in 2020 that things are moving slower initially really goes back to what I said earlier, that we are so far ahead from 2017. So when case managers started in 2017, FEMA had already come and gone. The deadline for FEMA application had already passed, et cetera. So they knew, okay, these people don't qualify. We can start asking for philanthropic dollars for rebuild, et cetera. Right now, our case managers are really working through that process of getting people other resources before we start looking for philanthropic dollars. So I would ask for patience and wait on some of those trying to get dollars pushed out there right away, because it is a process, like I said, and we want to make sure that we're utilizing every resource before we use those philanthropic dollars that have been so generously donated.
So Nancy, maybe you could just talk a little bit about where the case managers are, I mean, in terms of what counties they're in, and just a little bit of kind of what's day-to-day like for them as they work with individuals.
Sure. So we were able to receive funding for 5 case managers for the Great Lakes Bay flooding. And it was in part on generous donations from the Community Foundation in Midland, the Community Foundation in Saginaw, and UMCOR. So we have 2 case managers that are serving Midland proper that are housed at United Way in Midland. We have a case manager serving Sanford who is housed at, well, she actually just moved. She was at Meridian, but now she's at the Jerome Township Hall. And then we have a case manager in Gladwin who is at the Beaverton Activity Center, and we have one in Saginaw who's at the Emergency Manager's Office in Saginaw. And on a day-to-day basis right now, what they are really doing is working through some of that initial spreadsheet of people that had done self-reported assessments, as well as 211 calls. And those had been prioritized, so they're working with those folks on making those calls. We are going to utilize volunteers starting next week, I believe, in terms of being able to reach out and do some of that calling, so that our case managers can really start focusing on people that have the greatest need. And then along with that, calls that they've started to make, they've done assessments, they've done the screening, they've done the intake, they've done the assessment, and our construction manager has been out on multiple home visits looking at what needs to be done from a rebuild standpoint, and has been gathering data and bids to be able to try to start moving some of that forward. Again, some of these people, however, are waiting on decisions from SBA, and so we are holding up trying to take any of that in terms of providing resources for them until we know what other resources they can utilize.
Great, thank you, Nancy. And for those that might not be aware, SBA stands for Small Business Administration. And I know many times that's confusing because people go, what does that have to do with individuals needing help? But indeed, that is a way, and I might just toss it. I know we've got Dan Schulman on the line here on the Zoom call from FEMA. And Dan, I don't know if you want to just comment on a couple of those pieces just to make sure folks have a bit of an understanding of that.
Sure. So thank you very much, and thanks for having this and allowing us to participate. So I think I don't want to try and add anything to what Nancy has said. I think that she covered it better than certainly I ever could. I'm from our external affairs operation, so my focus is public communications. And Sarah is on the call, but is on multiple calls at once. So fortunately, I can be here to help out. So I do just want to make the pitch. As was mentioned, our biggest focus right now is getting people registered. That is the first and best way. It's really the only way for people to access that federal direct assistance from FEMA and SBA. And as you mentioned, the Small Business Administration does offer disaster recovery loans. It is an essential part of the delivery process for assistance from the federal government. And in fact, dollar for dollar, SBA typically provides more money than FEMA does by way of loan. And they're low interest loans. One of the things that we talk about with them, they're talking loans for individuals in the 1% to 2% over 30-year range. So really, when people are talking about rebuilding, they say, I don't want a loan. I'll just use my credit card. I'll borrow from my 401k if they have one. And really, it's a far cheaper way of accessing a lot of money through SBA than one of those other ways. And obviously, a lot of the people that you're working with, that's just not a reality anyways. 401k isn't something they have. But for those people that aren't eligible for a loan from SBA, they are referred back to FEMA for additional grant assistance. So really works in the stages with FEMA, SBA, back to FEMA. Of course, we're looking for insurance to play a role there if people have it. And then, of course, the essential support of our voluntary agency partners that really sort of bring people back to a state of normalcy once those federal dollars have been delivered. So certainly happy to talk about anything that we can do. I do want to just they made a great comment about the amount of federal assistance that FEMA has already provided by way of grants. I do want to mention our flood insurance program, which was on the ground really immediately after the flood. And we've already provided flood insurance more than $25 million into the community. So the individual assistance grants are great. They are an essential part of assistance for a lot of people. We really are encouraging people, especially now that people have more aware, to think about acquiring flood insurance for the next flood that likely will happen. Flood insurance provides a lot more assistance than our grants. Their average payouts in flood insurance are well over $60,000 per person per claim. So again, there's a lot more money in flood insurance than FEMA grants. So we encourage that. But happy to answer any questions about our process or assistance or how we work. And again, thanks for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Dan. And one thing I should mention about this incredible work that has gone on from the emergency stage through the relief, through long-term recovery, the work that Nancy and her team are doing right now in terms of disaster case management and construction, this is all taking place in a COVID environment. And so while we had a flood in 2017, not nearly the impact of this flood, we also weren't dealing with COVID. So I just want to say kudos to everyone involved, because it's been, a challenging environment in which to be able to assist individuals. So just to add a little more onto it, we had to have COVID, then the dam failure and the resulting flooding. So at this point, we would certainly love to hear from you with any questions that you have. And then the other thing is, we do have just a question for you to share with the group as well. So with the folks on the call, we'd love to, again, any questions, I think it'd be a great time for us to address those with certainly Nancy, and we so appreciate her coming on and talking about the whole disaster case management process. And thank you, Dan, for jumping on and sharing about FEMA as well. Really appreciate that. But can you share with the group, this is a question for you, one way that you've seen the community respond positively in light of the flood? Maybe one thing specific that you've observed. I know we've seen, countless acts, but maybe one thing specific that you would like to share with the group. Okay, so I see that Stefan has his hand up.
Yes, hi, I'm talking from Switzerland. You just mentioned before 2017 about the flood. I just want to show a quick picture of myself, which was actually on 25th of, do you see the picture? That was on the 25th of July on the Chippewa disc golf course, and actually I realized at this time how high the water can get. I arrived at this time at the city, all along the road, the city, it was full of dump, it was stinking, and then at this time I realized how bad it can be. And when I heard that 2 dams were broken, so I decided to support Midland. Even I can come mid to Midland this time. Hi, David.
Okay, well, thank you for your support for our community, Stefan, even from Switzerland. We really appreciate that. And that certainly, when we talk about one way that you've seen the community respond positively, there you go. There's an example right there. No longer here in the community, but responding positively and wanting to help. So thank you. Other questions? Or again, the question for you, how have you seen the community respond positively in light of the flooding that we experienced because of the dam failure? It's a Zoom pause, waiting for someone to share. Dave Pasick, okay. Emily, can you unmute Dave there? Or maybe Dave can unmute Dave.
I think I could unmute it. I just got muted. Sorry about that. Hi, Sharon. Hi, Emily. Hi, everyone. I want to just say how wonderful the community was. I couldn't imagine how many different ways that people supported our neighborhood. I live in the Gibson Street area that got hammered pretty badly. And there was just lots of great ideas from people handing out, you know, gift cards to Lowe's and Meijer or wherever, to just mobs of people just coming and, you know, from, I had a group from Jackson, I had a group from Lansing, I had a group from Muskegon, I think, and they were just looking for houses to work on. And so I was kind of like a case manager and working and saying, well, that house is ready down there, that needs this, that needs that. It was, honestly, the flood was hard for the neighborhood and our fellow neighbors, but I think the outpouring from people was even more delightful and overwhelming.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Others, a way that you've seen the community positively respond. Okay, I think we had a couple questions that came through that are for Dan. Dan Schulman. Did you see those show up in your chat, Dan?
I should also probably mute. I want to speak on the phone. So in terms of the question is, several have said livable, what does that mean for FEMA? Now we can camp in the house, but what winter's coming, need a furnace for heat and keep water running. So really one of the big thing that we like to stress, right, that we think is very important for people to understand, is that FEMA disaster assistance is not an insurance program. So We are not going to make the house exactly the way that it was before the disaster. We're focused on three keys: safe, sanitary, and secure. And really, that I'll use the term here, livable, because that's the question that was asked. We're looking at, for individuals that are eligible, providing assistance. Again, safe, we're talking about running water, functioning heating system and water heater, obviously electrical in the home. We're looking at the essential living space of that primary residence for the individual that was the occupying homeowner. For that person in their home, we're again looking at essential space. So a bedroom, a dining room, kitchen, living area. We don't do outbuildings, we don't do fences, we don't do landscaping. We're focused on making that primary residence habitable. So again, livable is a subjective term. Obviously, for people with access and functional needs, that's a different consideration, and we certainly can go above and beyond our normal limits of assistance to make sure that somebody that has access needs, if they need to replace a ramp, if they need accessible features in their home, those are all, of course, eligible for the otherwise eligible applicant. So in terms of livable, replacing windows, doors, roof, walls, if there's structural damage, those kinds of things. But those main essential elements of the home that you would think, are they eligible to make a house habitable? There's some things where it's a bit of a gray area depending on the individual case, especially if we're talking as a native Michigander. I'm from Flint, so just down the road. I know that we have a lot of basements, and for most people, basements are not, they're a rec room. They're a place for the kids to hang out, where we entertain, but we generally don't consider basements to be essential living area unless it is an essential element of the home. The family, the empty nest couple that has extra empty bedrooms upstairs, the basement's not essential living area. The family of 5 or 6 that has a bedroom in the basement, that basement is now essential living space. So it really depends on the specific case of how we would define habitable or sanitary and secure. But our primary focus is essential elements of the home that make it habitable. I have another question here from neighbors have been having problems getting FEMA support, turned down or hung up with insurance. Any help or advice? Sure. Number one, on the FEMA side, call us. We have a 1-800 number, 1-800-621-3362. Or all this information is at FEMA.gov or disasterassistance.gov. We want people to call us back. If they were initially denied, or they didn't get the amount of assistance that they think they need, we want them to call us back. We want to stay in touch with them. We want to have a continuing dialogue. It's not a one and done proposition. So we want that person to call us back and talk to us about what their continuing needs are. To ask us, we're going to send a letter. It's very bureaucratic. We've been through hundreds of iterations of that letter to try and make it more understandable. And it's a constant battle between our program staff and the lawyers and the courts who like to weigh in on what that letter says. But it's confusing, and especially confusing for people that are elderly and other, again, access and functional needs. So we want those people to call us and just ask us, why was I denied? In many cases, it's going to be a simple answer. It's going to be a simple, we need an additional piece of documentation from you, or some additional piece of information from you. In some cases, it's more complicated, and that's something we'll work with that individual on to make sure they understand what needs to be done, if something can be done to make them eligible. So on the FEMA side, we want them to stay in touch with us, call us, ask us for help. Help is there for people that need it. Thank you, Emily, for posting our number there in the chat box. Again, FEMA.gov, disasterassistance.gov, the 1-800 number is there, and people that use TCY or other access systems, our information is on the website. I'll drop it into the chat box shortly. for people that use those systems. On the insurance side, there's not a lot I can offer. That we're not a regulatory agency for homeowners insurance. I do know that the Department of Insurance and Financial Services has a hotline for people that are having problems with their insurance company if they feel like they've been wrongfully denied. I do want to point out that flooding is generally excluded from homeowners insurance. That's why I talked about flood insurance earlier. So people are thinking, well, it's not fair. You know, this was a disaster. It's not being covered by their insurance. In most cases, it's flooding, and flooding is generally excluded. So if people are having that problem with their insurance company, they don't think something was done right, contact DIFS, Department of Insurance and Financial Services, contact their hotline who can provide help dealing with those. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks, Dan. Other questions from the group or other comments on something that you've seen, a way you've seen the community respond positively in light of the flood? Any other questions? Okay. Okay.
I just unmuted. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, Stan.
Yeah, this is Stan Halpin. I just want to comment that we had what I think was a marvelous outpouring of offers of assistance from church groups who were walking the street and from people who gave us calls. And I've got to say that the flip side of that is that it was terribly confusing. And I wish in the future, the next time around, you can bring the whole case management concept into play on day one and not day 30 or 45, because I still don't know who I have worked with. I still don't know who to talk to. I have, you know, I'm at a roadblock with a number of things, and you know, do I go back to the church person? Do I go back to United Way? Do I try to get to FEMA, who denied me because my name doesn't match my social security number, which is absurd? You know, I'm stymied, and the help is so wonderful, but I don't know how to talk to people. So that's a question and a comment.
Stan, do you live in Midland County?
We're in the city limits.
Okay, so can I give you a telephone number to call, and that they'll put you in contact with a case manager that can help guide you?
Sure, that would help.
Okay, I can't put anything in the chat, so I'll just tell you it. 989.
Okay.
374 8000.
Okay.
And what is that number? To where?
That's the number for our Midland County disaster case managers.
So that includes the city?
Correct. Yes, it's for all of Midland County.
Okay.
Thank you. Can I jump in for one? I want to jump on, respond to one question that Stanley mentioned. The question of name not matching social security number. This is actually a more common.
Dan, it's really hard to hear you. I don't know if you can turn up your volume in some way.
Sorry, is that better?
No.
All right, let me try something else. All right, how about now?
Great. Great.
Headphones, they work for a little while. So I do want to say the question about name not matching social security number is actually one that comes up, unfortunately, more often than you might think. We do want those individuals to get back in touch with us. There are ways to get around that hurdle. Typically, we'll just need additional documentation from the disaster survivor that's gotten that information from FEMA, that there's a problem with their application. We also have document drop-off centers located in, shortly they'll be in all 5 counties, but right now just in Midland and Gladwin, for individuals that are having problems uploading information. And again, I'll drop it into the chat box for Emily, or if you can then share it back with the group about where those document drop-off centers are. People can drive up. We're taking all the appropriate COVID precautions. People will stay in their car. They'll hand over their documentation to a FEMA person. Will be wearing a FEMA shirt with FEMA ID, clearly marked. We can scan it and upload it for them, and then hand them all the documentation back. So those centers are an option for people that are having trouble submitting information to FEMA. And so I'll share that information in the chat box to be shared with the group. But again, we've been pushing that also through our social media. You can follow us on Twitter. We're at FEMA Region 5, or visit FEMA.gov, disasterassistance.gov for more information. So there's two other questions here. If you don't mind, I'll take them as long as I see them.
Go for
Is
it.
that okay?
Yes.
Thanks. Follow-up question about when FEMA application is denied because the insurance coverage is stuck in litigation. Will FEMA aid still be there once the insurance is resolved in months? So we're actually going to go about this in a different way, which is if you're having an ongoing dispute with your insurance and you have immediate needs, FEMA can provide advance assistance against that insurance. So if you're eligible, we can give you assistance that will assist with some of those needs now. If you receive insurance money for that same thing later on, we are going to expect that you will return that money to FEMA. But we can provide assistance immediately to address immediate needs while you're waiting on that insurance claim to be resolved. So that is something we can do. Again, we need that individual survivor to call FEMA and talk to us about what those needs are, about what this challenge is. If you have insurance, if we see that you have insurance, we're going to determine you ineligible because we can't duplicate insurance. But if you can tell us and you show us that this is a part of some ongoing problem with the insurance company, we can help that survivor work around those problems. So that is something we can do, and that assistance is there. Again, we need people that get in touch with us through our 1-800 number, through our website. You can download the app to a smartphone. And if all of those don't work, you can visit a document drop-off center with questions. It's not required, but you can do that as well. The FEMA staff that are helping with documentation are our survivor specialists, and they can answer some basic questions. But again, it's not what we're encouraging people to do. We'd rather have you call us, stay where you are, and we can do that remotely. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Thank you. So I know we're nearing the end of our time here, and it's been really, I've got to say, it's been wonderful to both hear about the disaster case management. Thank you so much, Nancy, for helping to bring an understanding of that whole process. We're really fortunate that we have FEMA on the line, so they were able to handle some of the questions because we're still in the active time of FEMA being here in our community. So really appreciate that, Dan, your willingness to step in and handle some of those. I will say there was one more question that came in, and that was, how do you best stay connected to support opportunities out there? Sometimes folks hear of businesses or churches offering things, but after the fact. And I guess the best way would be to things that we're aware of. And one of the wonderful things about a disaster, but also a challenging part of the disaster, is everyone wants to do something to help. So we're trying to do our best. That's the whole idea of the long-term recovery group, is let's come together, let's work together, let's all share what we have, make sure we get the information out there. And of course, 211 is a fantastic resource. We encourage you to call there, and reliefmidland.org, as we work to have that frequently asked question document continually updated with new information. But I guess that to say, even with that, there are times where people just will do something in the community, where churches will say, we're going to offer meals this day, stop by and get a meal. And I'm not sure there's any way that you honestly can avoid that happening, because it's people out of the outpouring of their hearts wanting to do something, but there are ways that that doesn't always get coordinated. So I'd say again, the best way, reliefmidland.org, call 211, and we'll do our best to make sure that, 211 is continually updating what they have as people call them to say what they're doing, what resources are available. So encourage you to make use of those. So as we come down to our last 3 minutes, I want to again say thank you. Thank you to all of you who joined today. Thanks for your interest in this. Thanks for your care for our community, for all that you're investing, whether in Switzerland or right here in town. Yeah, Stefan is waving from Switzerland to all of us, but we really appreciate your investment in this community and all the ways that you give and that you help us as a community. I want to say a special thanks to Nancy for being our speaker today, talking about the disaster case management system and how that works. And I want to say thank you to our long-term recovery group and all that they're doing. And I do have, I love quotations. Some of you know that about me. And I do have a Henry Ford quotation that I think is real apropos. And since he's a Michigander, I figured this is a great one to use. But coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. And that honestly is what we're endeavoring to do, is to work together so we can successfully help as our community recovers from this. So our next time that we'll be together is September 3rd. You will need to register in advance for that, so that information will come to you. Again, we will have speakers there as we work through different aspects of this disaster recovery, the long-term recovery group process. And we look forward to sharing with you and having a variety of people share with you. So thanks for joining us today. Great to see all of you.